Hello there. Well, for someone who's been associated with technology-based learning for something like 40 years now, it might seem a little bit strange to you that I would be questioning the need for e-learning, but there you go. I'm not particularly keen to go to the full half century with e-learning in its current form. But first of all, I need to just explain some terminology. We need to be clear what we mean by the term e-learning. Certainly in my mind, there are at least four manifestations of digital learning. The first of which is digital content. Now, this can include all sorts of things like videos, podcasts perhaps, texts in the form of articles and PDFs and what have you. But essentially it is linear content which is presented online. And of course, this has been a fantastic success, particularly video, which is probably the go-to resource for most people for what is really online learning, but they probably wouldn't think of it that way. So digital content is without doubt a fabulous success, but it's not necessarily exactly what we need in every situation. Then there is collaboration online, which includes all the uses of social networks and perhaps those sorts of forums and similar types of tools which appear within many learning management systems. And of course, the live online events like virtual classrooms and also webinars. Now, again, these have been a great success, and they have brought problems with them, but no one would doubt that people learn an enormous amount through collaboration online. The third type we could call high-end content, things like virtual reality, augmented reality, games and simulations, those sorts of things, which in the right circumstances could deliver very powerful learning experiences, but which are probably beyond the pocket of most of us involved in workplace learning. So let's leave that to one side for a minute, because they're probably absolutely bespoke implementations. What I really want to concentrate on today is self-paced instruction, which is the delivery of what we could call lessons, interactive lessons essentially, which take the learner towards a very specific learning objective. And that's what we normally call e-learning. So that's what we're concentrating on today. E-learning in one form or another has been around a very long time. In fact, there are probably people working in the industry who weren't born when it originated. So we ought to ask ourselves, how successful has it been? Well, one of the things we could ask is whether it is efficient. Now, by efficient, we can use a number of different measures, but I think most people would agree that e-learning has been efficient. These statistics here from quite an old Towards Maturity survey now, I'm sure there are similar figures for more recently, show that there are lots of ways in which e-learning can be seen to be faster, cheaper, quicker, more flexible, and so on. So I don't think anyone would doubt that e-learning has efficiency on its side. But what about how effective it is? I think that depends to a great degree on what we're comparing it against. If we compare it against the classroom, then most research seems to say that if you're doing roughly the same things in a classroom as you are in e-learning, then it's probably going to be equally as effective. And that's reasonable, I suppose, except that we also need to be very critical about the classroom, because there's lots of evidence to believe that that hasn't properly delivered on the investments that we put into it. Okay, what about if we compare e-learning with one-to-one instruction? Here's where I think we are seeing a big difference. One-to-one instruction is probably a lot more effective than e-learning. And the reason why it is more effective is because it is much more personalized. The person delivering the instruction can individualize the content that they present, the examples that they use, the amount of practice they give, the amount of feedback that they provide. the pace at which the instruction proceeds, and so on. And that personalization gives huge benefits, which is one of the reasons why, of course, people are prepared to pay a lot more for individual tuition in many fields in their life. And obviously that's an expensive option because it's not a very scalable option. What about popularity? Well, unfortunately, e-learning, as it's mainly delivered in a corporate context, is not very popular. And, that's not going to come as a surprise to anyone. Time and time again, I've been told that it's really a sort of horrible chore to have to go through e-learning, and that typically it's stuck in that compliance ghetto, if you like, where e-learning so often resides, where basically it's used to deliver training that's unpopular anyway. And, because e-learning is used to deliver unpopular training, it makes e-learning unpopular as well. And that's a sort of vicious circle that we've found ourselves in. So that's not a particularly good situation, because it does matter whether a medium is popular, at least to some degree, because if it's not popular, it gets a reputation. People tell other people, and people will avoid using it. And that's really not the sort of thing that we want to be associated with. Lastly, is e-learning commercially successful? Well, certainly there are people who have made money out of e-learning, and particularly people who create learning management systems and similar platforms. They have made good money out of it. Why do people need learning management systems? Largely because of that compliance training we were talking about earlier. So there are ways in which it has been commercially successful. But if you compare it with some of the other technologies which have grown up over the last 20 years, then it is not even in the same ballpark. It certainly hasn't been a game changer. It's just delivered some sort of steady revenue. And that's a pretty well an indication that something's not quite right. The next question I'd like to ask then is, do we really need e-learning? Okay, we know it's efficient. We know it can be as effective as the classroom in the right circumstances. We know it's not very popular. We know it's reasonably commercially successful, but nothing fantastic. Do we really need it? Well, I think we do. And although sometimes it's fashionable to think that we don't really need instruction, all we need is essentially open resources which people pull from. That's all very well, but it doesn't take account of the fact that there are certain things that people must know and must be able to do, and that an organisation has an obligation to make sure that their employees are able to do those things. And we can't just expect people to pull those resources as and when needed. You would expect as an employer to push those at the learner, and the learner would be not at all surprised that they were being pushed at them. In other words, this is part of their basic training, and that's essentially why we need instruction. Do we need self-paced instruction? Well, there's a strong argument for it, because if it's done well, we know it's going to be massively more efficient. And many people have to deliver training to large numbers of people, so efficiency is important. What we want to make sure of is that it's also effective. So one of the reasons then why we need self-paced instruction is because there are things that people must be able to do, and instruction is a way of making sure that the objectives are achieved and people finish the instruction with having reached the particular objectives. Okay, there is a second reason for having self-paced instruction, which is when learners are more dependent, which usually means that they are novices. So they don't have a lot of experience or past knowledge of the subject that they're being taught. So they don't have the hooks on which to build new learning, and they need to be much more carefully assisted through the process of learning. And we mustn't, make the mistake, I think, of believing that all people know how to learn and know how to manage that process entirely on their own. That's something which requires them to have metacognitive skills. In other words, that they've learned how to learn, and we can't assume that of everybody. So particularly when we're talking about novices, then self-paced instruction makes a lot of sense. Okay, so I hope you'd agree that there is a case for e-learning, for self-paced instruction of one form or another. But it certainly needs to be better than what we're seeing at the moment, and certainly a lot more than slides interspersed with multiple choice questions. In my next video, I'm going to try and make the point that the best way for e-learning to deliver on its promise is to go back to its roots, to do some of the things it was trying to do in its very early days. Now that's for next time. Until then, bye-bye.